Because the second you start limiting an individual's ability to move, whether it's for a pandemic or war or whatever the case might be, it's effectively the government telling you, we know better than you where you should be going. And I don't think that's an outcome from a political philosophy perspective that should ever be tolerated, because I don't think that can ever be true. Certain measures need to be taken for people's protection and safety. And there's many instances where the state does know and is acting on great information and acting, for the collective welfare of people. And you have to make some compromises day to day that are practical. But asking people to make an irreversible decision as a precondition to enjoying one of the most fundamental human rights I think we have on this planet, certainly in a Western democracy, that gives me a lot of pause for concern.
Yeah, that's very well said. I wanted to say something about what Karl was saying earlier about, I think you pointed to how so many people weren't even aware of the existence of the mandates. I have a story to share. Shortly after the truckers' protest, or in the midst of the truckers' protest, I think, or towards the end of it, several provinces started dismantling the vaccine passport system, if you remember. And I remember after the protests continued. People would show up on Parliament Hill, or they would, congregate around the War Memorial, and every weekend a few people would protest. About 100 people would show up or so, and the average Ottawa person would say, "Well, why are you still protesting? The mandates are all gone." And I would tell them, no, the travel mandate is still in place. 5-6 million Canadians can't even get on a train to go across the country. They can't even leave the country if they wanted to. And then the mandates that apply to the civil service, there are people in the civil service who have been on leave without pay for 6 months. And they would just look at me stunned, or they would think that I was making it up. And this was very similar to responses I would get online as well. I mean, why are you still writing about mandates when they've all been removed by the provinces? So it's amazing how the federal government's mandates just didn't get the attention it deserved. It's almost like it didn't exist.
The biggest criminals in this have been the Canadian legacy media. Because the government will get away with whatever they can get away with, right? But the fact that the media, who are supposed to be there reporting the news, chose to not only not report what was really happening, they chose to promote a false narrative. And we know that now to be a false narrative. We know that, and I'll say it out loud, they lied. And the media, I think, have been the biggest contributor over the last 2 years to a lot of these things that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the government did, this is it's devious, actually. I thought you may have noticed this or not, but when they lifted, and they did this throughout 2022, a bit ahead of suspending, and there's a different term. I mean, suspending isn't ending, right? But when they suspended these vaccines as a precondition to travel, the mandates around that was one thing. But ahead of that, what they were doing was very, very devious. And when they were removing restrictions, they dropped the distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated. And they just started using language such as, we're removing the requirement for, testing or whatever for travel. And the same's happened in New Zealand recently, where it's the media will report it as New Zealand drops all mandates or conditions for travel. But that's not true. You still need to be, for example, you still need to be proof of vaccination to go into New Zealand, and it happened here. So people were just talking about travelers. The distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated travelers was dropped. And that almost sort of made people who had chosen not to have the injections as if they didn't exist. When in reality, we all know that now people coming back into Canada who have chosen not to have the injections, are accosted at the airport by Public Health Agency of Canada agents who, will try to make them stay at home for 14 days and bombard them with telephone calls and emails, even though these people don't have COVID, at no greater risk of having COVID or transmitting it or infecting anybody else as somebody who has had the vaccinations, which we now know to be true. And that's still not out there. Most Canadians probably still don't know that that's being imposed upon the so-called unvaccinated Canadians. I think the government's played very fast and loose with the law. It's been very devious with its use of language. And some days I think I'm in the middle of somebody's strategic flow chart, you know, some days.
Sorry, I would also question the logic of people who are asking why someone is reporting or talking about a measure that's no longer in place, right? I mean, to me, that's the equivalent of saying, why are we talking about a war that's no longer active? Or why do we talk about history at all, right? The fact that something has come and gone doesn't mean that it should escape our consideration. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be critical about the decisions that were made at that point in time, because that's the only way we're going to learn about how we're going to handle the next type of crisis and what should and should not be acceptable public health measures.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And you know, speaking of which, I mean, do you think there's going to be some kind of accountability down the road from the government? You know, we're trying to do it through, you're trying to do it through the courts, but you think we'll see some change maybe at the ballot box? Do you think there's going to be any kind of accountability?
Well, I guess ultimate accountability is at the ballot box. We are optimistic that we will see some accountability in court. As you know, obviously the process is still unfolding. So we're all, you know, just going through that process and being patient, and we'll see where that takes us. But I'm optimistic that this, in conjunction with several other things, you know, hopefully might get people a different result.
Yeah. Shawn, Karl?
I mean, there's a real opportunity here for the Canadian courts to again, you know, to step up and take and deal with this issue and not simply take a deferential bow to the federal government. It's a complicated issue, but that's not a reason to just rely on what the government says as being true, because the government says there's an emergency, because the government says it has to do this. This is an opportunity for real scrutiny, and it's an opportunity to test more thoroughly our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and particularly with regard to Section 1 of that. You know, it's a young constitution. Canada's constitution has been in existence since 1982. We're not talking about the US Constitution or the type of constitutional law that might be in the UK and old democracies like that. There's a real moment here for, on the widest level, for the Canadian judiciary to look at this and to reassure Canadians that this kind of casual health-based discrimination isn't something that can take root in Canada. I hope they take that very, very seriously and not show deference. I mean, certainly we've seen some examples recently. I mean, I've been sitting in the Supreme Court of BC, listening to the Chief Justice there, who's due to hand down a decision in relation to proof of vaccination more widely in British Columbia. And certainly some of the language that Chief Justice Hinkson was using in British Columbia was encouraging, insofar as it was clear that he understood the issues and wasn't just going to defer to government. He wasn't just going to, you know, accept what they were saying. And he asked some difficult questions and made some interesting statements there. And hopefully there's something good comes out of that. And I think we'd like to see our case be heard. We'd like the judge who hears if there is, you know, there's going to be an argument around whether this issue is moot or not, we'd like the judge who hears that case to exercise his or her discretion, that this is of such public importance that they want to hear the case and the core issues and the merits, and go ahead with the hearing. And that will give Canadians an opportunity to hear it. It'll give the government an opportunity to explain its thinking, rather than try to push it under the corner of the rug.
And justify it too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
Sorry, Shawn, I want to echo something Karl just said. I think it is a very critical opportunity. And quite frankly, I think that difficult moments in our political history like this are the best opportunities to decide very complicated and difficult cases, because it's the point in time where people need the most guidance. And it's likely the point in time where the government needs the most scrutiny, quite frankly, because moments of crisis breed a lot of uncertainty and they breed a lot of panic. And those are frankly the conditions in which we see a lot of sweeping measures come into place. And I couldn't imagine a more appropriate time and place to consider the constitutionality of these types of public health rationales than right now.
Shawn, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say that I was going to echo kind of what Karl said too, and what Sam said. But and again, some of your viewers may not be aware of the mootness motion. But that's my biggest concern right now, is that the government, the Attorney General of Canada and their council have filed a motion of mootness against these 4 cases. And now we have to go and sort of fight a separate hearing on September 19th, which was originally our final hearing date, which will now be in October. However, we have to get over that hurdle. It's quite a big hurdle in the fact that they seem convinced, and I'll let Sam talk about this more in legal terms, but that really concerns me, the fact that we may not even make it to a hearing if they decide this case to be moot. It's mind-boggling to me how they can even contemplate that this is moot, in the fact that these measures have only been suspended. They haven't been revoked, and they've made it very clear they can bring them back anytime. But I'll hand it over to Sam to explain the mootness motion to everybody a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so there are situations where the original controversy no longer exists, and there's an infinite number of reasons why. The classical example might be that you challenge the constitutionality of something. There's a previous challenge; it's been struck. It's of no longer any consequence. So the general idea here is that the courts are not going to use the limited times and resources that they have, to decide disputes between parties that practically don't have any effect on their legal rights, right? So they're not here they're not here to have an Oxford debate with you or kind of a theoretical discussion, and you can have that elsewhere if there's not going to be a concrete, tangible benefit that's going to flow from that. And there's a lot of cases, even in the context of COVID, that do get dismissed because, as you know, these public health policies get activated and deactivated over time. And you're playing a timing game, quite frankly. I was in a situation where I started an appeal with respect to the constitutionality of restrictions on outdoor gatherings in Ontario. At the time I finished my appeal materials, there was a limit, which we argued was unconstitutional. By the time I got the responding submissions from the government, the limit had been revoked. A couple of months later, it was back on. And then a couple of weeks before the hearing, it was revoked again. And it just so happens that in this game of kind of musical chairs, it's what chair you're sitting in last. And if the public health policies are no longer in place at the specific point in time you're speaking to the court, there seems to be a trend that they're not going to hear it.
So could that be one explanation for why we've not had much success with people challenging mandates through the courts or lockdowns and other restrictions over the course of the pandemic?
It's a formidable challenge. Getting around a mootness argument is very tough. It's the bench has made it very clear that they will not spend time, absent very special circumstances, dealing with issues that have been deactivated. And sometimes they're deactivated permanently. It's in sometimes for a very long time. I mean, obviously now in Ontario, we're not seeing a return to a lot of the public health measures, but that's not to say that they can't come back. And it's also not to say that those decisions wouldn't be instructive for future scenarios that might not necessarily be identical, but could be parallel to what we've observed with COVID. But at the end of the day, it's a challenge for this case, as it is for a lot of cases, whether it's in the constitutional context or not. And it's something you have to be aware of as a lawyer. And it's a risk you take. And we're going to be putting our best foot forward. And we hope the court agrees with us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wish you guys all the best. Wanted to ask the three of you what's next for the three of you. I know you've told me what's next for you in terms of the case going forward. You have a hearing in September and the final hearing in October. But you know, what else is next for the three of you? Are you the two of you, Shawn and Karl? Are you going to be traveling anytime soon? Are you going to be getting on a plane, going overseas to see your parents?
I can't. I run my own business, small business, contracting business, and I just. I mean, there's a possibility if I came back and I followed some of those instructions that you see people posting videos about right now, but I just can't risk being locked in my house for 2 weeks. I would love to go and see my family and my father right now, but realistically, as far as I'm concerned, this was kind of a bait and switch game they did. They suspended the mandates and then kind of upped the ante on the ArriveCan app and the quarantine, right?
Exactly.
And they're really sort of going hard after people that they are able to get into quarantine. So I just can't risk not being able to visit job sites and my guys working. If I went to England, it would be for like 5 or 6 days. But I can't take 2 weeks when I return from that trip on top. And I can't speak for Karl, obviously, but.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, ordinarily I was back and forward to Europe every 5 or 6 weeks for my business interests there. And I haven't done that for, you know, quite some time now with all the restrictions that have been in place of varying kinds. And to some extent, it's the same. You know, I do want to go back. I do want to see my family. I have an elderly mother. I've got my family and friends back there. I'd like to see them, and I'm used to doing that because I'm used to going backwards and forwards. And so there's been a commercial disadvantage for certain, a lot of personal disadvantage, and you know, personal pain, and always the risk that you might during this period weren't able to travel, that you might lose a relative and not be able to travel. And that was one of the very stark things that came out in the case, in the cross-examination. And you know, hopefully it gets considered more, but was almost the relish that was taken by the people who put these mandates in place in ensuring that compassionate exemptions for Canadians were not made.
Yes,
and that to me, I don't understand that. It seems it's un-Canadian, it's inhuman, it's highly discriminatory, it's ethically wrong. I don't understand why a government of a Western democracy would take such a view. And that's, I think, another issue that as Canadians come back together, which is one of the things we all need to do. We all need to work as Canadians to come back together. Yeah, we have a divisive government that seems to relish the opportunity it sees in that. I can't see any viable opportunity in that, but they seem to be able to. Canadians have to come back together, and we have to think about this. And I think just that the government may have misread that. You know, it may have overplayed its hand. Perhaps in their rush to get it re-elected in 2021, they had felt that Canadians fell into one of two camps. And that's not true. You know, there's a lot of people who would qualify as fully vaccinated in that period of time, but would be reluctant. Were they going to lose their job, lose the ability to provide for their family? Or were they going to go ahead? And they're not going to be long-term supporters of the same thing happening again to them. It's more nuanced. It's much more nuanced than the government maybe have worked out. And you can see by watching the government, you know, the current polls coming in, that perhaps they might have misread.
I think there was overwhelming support for the mandates. I think 70% of Canadians who were polled, I believe around September, supported mandates, and then there was a recent poll that came out a few weeks ago. That number is down to 20%. Ideally, you want zero, but it's still a sharp decline, and that's pretty encouraging. I think people are starting to ask questions. Right? Did these mandates make a difference in the end? And I think a lot of people are starting to have some doubts here, and that's certainly reflected in some of these polls.
Yeah,
I mean, certainly it'd be good to challenge. I mean,
yeah,
going forward, I mean, we're not in this place yet, but looking at the alleged use of the Quarantine Act to continue to persecute the people that didn't do what the Prime Minister said. It's something that needs to be challenged, and maybe we'll, with others, consider how we might try to play a role in that going forward as well. There's lots to think about, but that's another challenge that hopefully is taken on and corrected.
It's something we've always talked about, right, Karl? Is to get this to the end, is to get it heard, so that a goal of ours never to have it happen again. It can't happen again.
To have it heard, I mean, Sam, you know, I think Sam will know more about it. I think it's an in-person if we get as far as a hearing, it's an in-person hearing, Sam, isn't it?
It probably will be. I mean, our mootness hearing is going to be in person in Ottawa. So I would imagine, you know, unless there is a very significant change in the circumstances, epidemiological circumstances, I would imagine that, you know, the actual application hearing is going to be in person, and it should be in person. It deserves that level of respect and that sort of, you know, solemn attention, and I trust we'll get it.
Everything is in person these days. So what is their excuse?
We've been in Zoom hearings and cross-examinations since the get-go. If we have an in-person hearing in September, that'll be the first in-person hearing we've had in.
Well, I think the considerations are a little bit different in the federal sense than they would be within a province. If this matter was exclusively within a specific province, the factors would be a lot different. But when we're dealing with counsel in different provinces, some witnesses in different provinces, and a judge in Ottawa,
I see.
There are certainly some practical benefits that are achieved by having a Zoom. But obviously, you know, when you get to the finale, it's preferable. I would imagine it's preferable to have that in person, because the interaction, the dynamics of the interaction between the lawyer and the judge, I think it's very tough to replicate that dynamic over video, you know, conferencing.
That's September 19th, and so it'll be interesting to see how many people show up for that. But
nice to see.
They'll probably have police with batons there and everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you read some of the reactions to my story, but the three of you are seen as national heroes, and there are, you know, some of the comments are. Well, there are a lot of, you know, there's been an outpouring of emotion over the last couple of days, you know, because you've unleashed something here. You know, a lot of people have been suffering suffering in silence sometimes, and at what they feel is very unjust. And here you are, you know, the three of you just fighting this out. And it's just extraordinary. I think it's an extraordinary story. And I'm sure there's more to say here as the case proceeds. But, you know, I'm so glad to have been part of this, at least a small part of this journey, a small part of this important effort on your part to get to the bottom of the government's policies as they relate to the mandates. And I really, really hope that there's some accountability at the end of the day. And I really want to thank the three of you for coming on the show. And you know, it's truly an honor, and hopefully, you know, we'll have you back again. Yep.
One additional point, if I can cut you off there for a second, is filing an application with an injunction too against the Arrive Canada to hopefully get that at least put on hold for now until we can get to a hearing. So we're working on filing an application for that too. So
okay, well, I will keep keep us posted, and you know, I wish you all the best, and it was truly an honor to have the three of you here, and I'm sure we'll catch up sometime soon again.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
All right, thank you.
Thanks everyone, take care.
Take care. Bye.